welcome to Sci-Fi Night. I'm your host, Sebastian Vettel Martinez, and this is the show where we take a look at some of the lesser-known sci-fi and horror movies out there and try to find the right expectations needed to get the most out of them. So, in tonight's episode, we're taking a look at a film starring the future Batman himself, Ben Affleck. Phantoms is a 1998 horror film based on a Dean Koontz book by the same name. It stars Rose McGowan, Liev Schreiber, Peter O'Toole, and a kind of bored and tired Ben Affleck.
Alright, what the hell's going on here?
It starts off with two sisters going on a getaway to a small town in Colorado where they're from. But when they arrive, the town seems completely deserted, aside from a few dead bodies strewn around the place. They eventually run into a trio of cops headed by Affleck, who are also trying to figure out what's going on. Eventually, because of clues found around the town, they contact Peter O'Toole, who plays a scientist who's written about something called the Ancient Enemy, that may very well be the cause of all this.
We're interested in this thing you call the Ancient Enemy.
Not the tabloid stuff, the hard science.
Eventually the military get brought in and things start hitting off in exactly the way you'd expect from a sci-fi action horror film. A lot of people's response for this film seems to be surprisingly positive. After all, it stars Ben Affleck, it's based on a book by a writer whose previous works haven't translated that well into film, it stars Ben Affleck, it only made $3 million during opening weekend, and it stars Ben Affleck. Overall though, I'd say this film is kind of surprisingly good and a lot better than you'd think it is by first glance. Well, I guess at least half of it is anyway. The first half is pretty suspenseful, and there's a real eerie feeling throughout the deserted town, as well as a lot of genuinely creepy and atmospheric scenes.
Who are you?
Really, in the first part is where the movie shines, and all the suspenseful build-up and all the questions brought up as to what the Ancient Enemy is and what it's done to the town. However, there are quite a few dry parts with half-assed acting, some poor dialogue, and cheesy moments.
Yeah, I noticed that.
When the second half comes around, there's still a couple cool parts, but it's also got a bit of subpar cliche action that really detracts from the serious and creepy tone up until then.
Get out of there! Move it!
The action scenes are okay, they're hardly terrible, but they're not nearly as interesting as the previous scenes of mystery. There's still a few cool shots, but just not on the same level as earlier. Unfortunately, the cast is a mixed bag. Peter O'Toole is great, but come on, I mean, you know he's a veteran.
Well, which is why a big-time paleobiologist like yourself works here.
No, I need the money.
And a lot of the rest of the cast is just kind of dull. Joanna Going is pretty boring, Rose McGowan seems to be giving it a strong C-.
Screw waiting, Jenny, I don't want to die like this!
And Ben Affleck brings the charisma levels of somebody who's chronically depressed. Sure, he's got a tragic backstory, but he just seems so bored.
But Affleck was the bomb in Phantoms.
Word, bitch. Phantom's like a motherfucker.
Liev Schreiber, though, is delightfully weird, creepy, quirky, and colorful. Like, seriously, this guy's one of the best parts of the movie. I mean, just look at that laugh. Overall, I like the feel of this movie, the sense of isolation, and feeling of paranoia. It's not all realized in the best of ways, but the cinematography holds up alright, despite some boring actors and cheesy flaws. But being a sucker for a cool atmospheric build-up, this film has a lot of themes that I really enjoy. It's definitely not a masterpiece, but it's also definitely better than it seems. So, what should you expect from this movie? Good atmosphere. One of the things that this film does well is the brooding creepiness that surrounds the deserted town. It really is the strongest part of the film, and at the very least the first half is well worth watching for fans of horror and suspense. a mixed bag. Like I said, some of the actors do a good job, but then again, it's also the actors you kind of expect a good performance from. I mean, say what you will about Liev Schreiber, he's at least always entertaining. Ben Affleck is dull as a protagonist, and the two sisters are on a whole lot better. Even during the more suspenseful first half, there are some pretty dry scenes and flat deliveries.
The line just went dead. We got here as soon as we could.
So it's more or less hit and miss, but at least it sticks when it hits. Strong start, weak finish. Much like Event Horizon, this film doesn't really execute the action-packed conclusion as well as you'd want. Had it stayed in the same tone and just amped up the horror elements, then this could have been an underrated gem. But the weak actors and cheesy action second half just make it look like kind of a fun, cool movie, which really could be a lot worse. I haven't read the book, but from what I understand, they changed the ending pretty drastically, which might explain why the ending does feel a little bit flat. Supposedly budget constraints were the reason as to why we had to change the ending, and it's a shame that we had to do so. Still, this isn't a bad film, but it's also not as good as it could have been. So depending on how picky you are or aren't, then you could still be in for a pretty reasonably good time here. I'd say this is certainly a good if you set your standards for a Ben Affleck film. I mean, come on, this is at least 5 times better than Daredevil.
Yeah, I noticed that.
And who knows, it might even be better than his coming portrayal of Batman. I mean, I don't think any of us have high hopes for that, right? So, that about does it for this episode of Sci-Fi Night. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please click the like and subscribe button and leave us a comment below. If you didn't, then at least don't be an asshole and click the dislike button. And regardless of if you did or didn't, then you could at least leave the film going until the end. I mean, it won't hurt you, right? So, like I said, leave us some suggestions in the comments as to what films we should bring up next, what you think of the movie Phantoms, and what you thought of this episode. As always, I'm your host, Sebastian Mendel Martinez, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Word, bitch. Phantom's like a motherfucker.